Are the characters Olivia Pope and Mary Jane Paul indicative of a larger societal issue? Is the Me Too movement exposing the church's silence on sexual assault and abuse? And how can the church be intentional about empowering women? We're going to talk about that and more on this episode of The Urban Perspective. Well, Pastor Jerome here. I'm excited to be on The Urban Perspective. I am joined by Dr. Sarita Lyons. She is the wife of Mark Lyons for 17 years, the mother of four beautiful children. She has her PhD from Drexel University, and she's going to be dropping jewels on us today. Sarita, Dr. Lyons, I'm sorry. Welcome to The Urban Perspective.
Hello. Thank you so much. Good to be here. I
We're
appreciate the work you're doing through Urban Perspective.
Thank you so much. Well, I appreciate the work you're doing. I want to dive right in. I was able to view a video you did. It was a Facebook Live video in which you were addressing women that intentionally pursued married men. An artist by the name of SZA really gained critical acclaim for a song called "The Weekend." And the weekend has been dubbed by many as a side chick or side piece anthem. She seems to be okay with the idea of being the other woman, and it seems as if when we look at characters. Now, I want to be clear. I'm talking about the character Olivia Pope, not Kerry Washington herself. The character Mary Jane Paul, not Gabrielle Union Wade herself. But what were your initial thoughts? Two-part question. What were your initial thoughts when you heard the song? And why does our culture seem to be empowering the mistress?
Yes. Wow, this is a great topic. I would have to say first, I hadn't heard the song until you even invited me to be a part of this. And I watched the video and exposed myself to the song at the same time. I think my initial reaction was shock, sadness. I definitely felt I was lamenting quite a bit just to see another sister, another beautiful sister. Um, Relegate herself to leftovers and a second position, and to do so in a very emboldened way, kind of like okay with it. A lot of times you would think that that would be a position that a woman would lament and have deep sorrow over. But no, it is a new trend nowadays, should we say, that being the mistress is no longer shameful. It's no longer embarrassing, and people, like in this song, are declaring it boldly. So I was sad. The part about being shocked definitely waned quite quickly. Even talking to my husband about this topic, he wisely brought to my attention, and then we started thinking about it, like, yeah, that really the weekend, this song is just a remake, right, of a history of songs that have been coaching our culture in acceptance of infidelity and adultery and being the mistress. So we have been coached in this a long time. So we were like remembering, it's easy today for us to look at this generation and say, I can't believe she's talking about you can have him Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, just bring him home for the weekend, bring him to me for the weekend. But if you think about it, SWV, they used to have a song called You're the One for Me. And the song was basically saying, I know you got a girlfriend and I'm trying hard to leave you alone, but you're the one for me. Then Michelle Diocello, I think I'm pronouncing her name right. She has that song that's called If That's Your Boyfriend, He Wasn't Last Night. Right? So that's like, and then remember now, this is how we get caught up, because remember Whitney Houston? She had that song, I'm saving all my love for you.
Yeah.
Right? I mean, that was nuts, but we it was so melodious and sang so well. She actually says at some point in the song, You told me that we would run away because love deserves to be free.
Mm.
Right? That whole idea. There's a part in the song when she says, I know you have a wife and children and they need you, but I need you too. And then we had Luther Vandross, right? He was like, if only for one night. So we've been
Yeah.
really coached, right?
Yeah.
And we can't forget, I think it was like in 1986, it was like the anthem of the year was Shirley Murdoch, right? And
Wow.
that As We Lay.
Uh-huh.
Come on.
Yeah.
The Weekend is
Yeah.
nothing new.
Yeah, it's
The
nothing new.
Weekend is nothing new. And then we can go on and on. I mean, even back in the day when you think of like Luther Ingram, if loving you is wrong,
I
I
don't
don't
want to
want
be
to
right.
be right. We
Yeah.
could go on with the
Yeah.
folks that was like me and Mrs. Jones. We got a thing going on. I mean, this is really nothing new. We could just go down and down. And then I used to love that song to end, Mint Condition, because it was really that song that seemed to be wrestling with the idea of adultery, with the idea of being a mistress or having another woman. And they're saying, what kind of man would I be if I lived unfaithfully? But then
Yeah.
he's talking to a woman he's obviously gone too far with, because he's saying, and what kind of girl
Where
would
would
you be
you be if you
to
did the
do the
same?
same?
Right.
So, I mean,
Right.
so can we
Right.
really be shocked?
Yeah.
Can we really be shocked? And the thing I want to say is that the world, the culture, has been coaching us
Mm.
in being a mistress and infidelity for a long, long time.
Wow. Now, do you think, with your clinical background, is this indicative of a larger issue?
Yeah.
And obviously, as believers, we understand the spiritual connection, and I definitely want you
Hmm.
to speak into that. But
Hmm.
but psychologically, what is going on in terms
Yeah.
of how you value, or I would say devalue yourself?
Absolutely. That's great. So I definitely think that there are some things beneath the surface that we don't often talk about that we need to get into. So, number one, I think the justifications, the excuse making that has to go on in the psyche, whether it is explicit or implicit, meaning someone is actually telling someone these excuses, or this is just what they're doing to self soothe. Number one is for women, such as the young lady singing The Weekend, there has to be this role reversal argument that
Mm.
happens. It is the warped, perverted sexual revolution, should we say that, that is going on in the lives of many women. And a lot of women literally are saying, Pastor, men have been doing it
Yeah.
forever.
Yeah.
Men have been doing it and no one has made a big stink about it. No one's trying to have a YouTube video about why men do it, but we always want to talk about why women participate in it. And there is this belief that I am kind of reclaiming my sexuality by allowing myself to be in a position that I'm okay with. So the justifying narrative is it's role reversal. I am doing what men have always been doing. They seem to enjoy it and be empowered by it, and they don't carry the guilt and shame that are often projected onto women. So I think that's one of the ways in which we are buffering the conviction with doing something that no soul would really want to do. And I want to talk about that in a minute. I think the other things that you have to think about with regard to why a person would do it is that there are two main issues that are popping up: power and control.
Hmm.
Okay, so kind of in line with this sexual revolution, many women have convinced themselves that it is very powerful, that they are very powerful and special, that a man that is committed to another woman would take the risk to being to be with them, that there is something about a woman that is so irresistible that he would put his life, his family, his children, his reputation in danger. The other reason why power and control are huge is because the mistress also becomes the gatekeeper of the man's secrets. And so in this relationship, she has power and control to an extent over his reputation. And so if I am the gatekeeper of a man's secret at any moment, I could blow up the spot. And so for
Right.
some women, that is a huge piece of the control and power that they end up feeling in that type of relationship. Also, I would have to say, you know, some of the things that are the consequences or result of even women who've suffered abuse. And I know we'll talk a little bit about that in a minute. Um, Everybody responds to abuse differently, right? And so some people, um, try to defeminize themselves as a way to keep men unattracted to them and keep them at bay to avoid a repeat of sexual abuse. Some women become extremely promiscuous as a way to say, no man is ever going to take my body from me. I'm just going to willingly give it up.
Mm.
And then the mistress role is also oftentimes another outgrowth of someone who has not healed from years of trauma or sexual abuse, because once again is, I want to now have power over my body. I know what it's like to not have power, for someone to take. And so if I am going, even actually there was an interview with the young lady who did The Weekend on the Breakfast Club, and she actually said that. She actually said that it is empowering for me to do with my body whatever I want to do with it. But women who think that way have often had people do things with their body they didn't give them permission to do.
Wow.
So that's another thing. You know how they often say some people are addicted to drama? Well, because of an affair, because of its secretive nature, because there is a lot of maneuvering and getting around schedules and hiding, some people really are addicted to the rush of the risk is what I would claim to call it. It's like the
Mm.
rush of the risk,
Mm.
the sneaking, the trying to figure out what dinner or movie theater we can go to and not be caught. The idea that he's texting and calling and saying, I'm trying to get out of the house. Some people are so blinded. Well, these are all mechanisms, I just want to say, to push people away from being sensitive about what's at the core going on. So these are some of the things that people get caught up in. I would say, as a very base minimum, no one could really argue the fact, although they justify it with against this, that people have to have a serious level of breach and brokenness in their self-worth and self-esteem in order to be a mistress. I would say there's been damage to their dignity.
Wow.
Anytime a woman would willingly put herself in a position to be in a relationship with a man who wants a piece of her, but not all of her. I mean, that's
Yeah.
a key thing,
Yeah.
because you're all of who you are is not wanted. Just because your whole body is wanted, it doesn't mean your heart is wanted. And so women are bartering for love and attention and affection with their body,
Wow.
and are tricking themselves into believing that that is enough, that is enough. One of the things that I want to talk about too is the idea that for some women who have been wounded in previous relationships, and we'll talk about the father issue in a second, it is easier to play second than first. Some women really do. We think men are the only people that struggle with intimacy and connection. That is not true. For even women, sometimes it is easier to have a very distant, disconnected relationship that is physical, or even when it's not sexual all the time, it is very surface,
Mm-hmm.
because to connect in that very intimate way requires being known. And being known requires vulnerability. And anytime someone is trying to avoid being vulnerable, they get busy on the surface with a lot of surface issues and things. And the body is a very, very surface, temporal way to engage someone that is really not what God intended for full intimacy to be experienced or known on. But it is often very comfortable for women who are afraid of being wounded on a deeper emotional, spiritual level. Um, I would often now here's a piece that you don't often hear when we talk about why women might play second or be willing to be the mistress. I really believe that in some cases, not all, you'll see patterns of women who've likely been abandoned and experienced an absentee father, right? So for many women who are free to put themselves in this position, the truth of the matter is they are recreating and revisiting, experiencing in a relationship with a man exactly what they experienced with their dad.
Wow.
So they are literally recreating what it felt like as a girl to not have a father either be present or be present consistently. So if your father was not in the picture, and every girl, every boy yearns for the love and affection and affirmation of their father, and if the way your father engaged you was take what you can get, if I only can come get you once a month, if I only see you twice a year, still find that to be enough to satisfy your need for love and nurturing. And so, is it a wonder that women who used to be girls who had an in and out, sometimey daddy would be willing, and they wanted to love them, would be willing and conditioned for a relationship where they did not have a consistent, faithful man?
Wow. That's a profound revelation that you dropped on us, because what we're seeing is they're making the dysfunction the antidote. Man, but how can people in this situation to where they've been conditioned to playing second, or being in a secretive relationship,
Mhm.
how what would you admonish them to do in order to get out of it?
Okay, well, one, and this is for I want to say this for the person in it, and then the people who are in relationship with them, and also the church. They're similar admonishments. One, I think it's important to humanize even the woman doing this. I think the woman, we are okay in this society with villainizing the woman all the time,
Mm-hmm.
right? And not really seeing her beyond her actions and seeing the brokenness, so that we can have empathy for her and consider her a person who needs love, support, and, like Paul says at the end of the chapter in First Corinthians, he says, "I'll show you a more excellent way."
Way, yeah.
And so, number one, I would say for the woman and for the church to realize that, get in touch with your real feelings about it. Because I will say, no matter what a woman says, she does have guilt about this.
Hmm.
She has guilt about this unless she's a sociopath. So, sociopaths diagnostically are unable to have empathy and feel what other people feel. They're unable to feel regret and remorse. But if you are doing anything, right, that goes against, even if you're not a Christian, I mean, just like normal values and morals, the idea that you're keeping it a secret is the evidence that even you know it's wrong. That woman does feel guilt. She pushes it aside. She covers it with excuses and justifications, but she needs to allow herself to get in touch with that guilt. One of the ways that she buffers the guilt is to dehumanize or to not think about the wife or the children, or to have rehearsed the narrative that the man gives the woman about his wife to
Mm-hmm.
keep her feeling like she's helping him. Right. So no man is going to bed with a mistress usually saying, "My wife is awesome. She's a great mother. She supports me. She cares for my family. She's a godly woman." Like, that is not the man. That is not the narrative, though that might be the woman that he's showing up with. So women have to, I would encourage the woman to feel, allow yourself to feel the guilt that you rightfully ought to feel, and to allow who he's leaving behind to be something that is real to you. And then, in feeling what you feel, for you to be human to yourself. Because to be in a relationship like this, it may be hot and passionate, but it is soulless.
Mm.
It is a soulless relationship where you have to shut so much of what is real down in order to even participate, that you need to begin to feel again in order to even have the impetus and the energy and the motivation to get out. I would say, also feel the jealousy, because there is a sense of jealousy that this, and we don't often think, she does get jealous. And those are the things she needs to tap into that remind her that this is wrong, right? So I'm just saying, these are like base things, even before we put a lot of Bible on it. I just want to say, because these are the things that she's constantly on a daily basis trying to rewrite and push down. And then ultimately, when we think about self-esteem and self-worth, these are identity issues, right? And so when we think about what it means to have your identity rooted in Christ, these are women that need to connect back with a foundational principle, that they were created in the image of God, that their life that their body, that their call, that their purpose is something that God has ordained from the foundation of the world. And no matter what they do to discredit it or degrade it, it still is so. And so we're not really telling women, you've got to get dignity. You've got to be reminded you have dignity.
Right.
It's not that we're telling women, you need to go get you some worth. You have to be reminded that inherent in you is already worth because you were created in the image of God. And
Right.
really, what women need to know is you're living beneath who you actually are.
Absolutely.
Who you actually are,
That's
living
good.
beneath that. And because its soul is what it really taps into is the fear. See, here's what's really the motivation for being the mistress. It is rooted in insecurity and fear. Insecurity about whether or not I actually am good enough for a faithful, committed, respectable relationship. I've never felt good enough about myself. And sometimes, though they might not overtly say it, there has to be this question in the heart of, is this the best that I can do? Is
Right.
this the best that I can do? Because some women really do believe, and it may be the truth, because it might not be your time for a healthy relationship. It may be, some women really believe, if I let this relationship go, the thing I fear the most is being alone. I fear being
Mm.
alone.
Right.
I fear being untouched. I fear not being desired by a man, more devastating than the degradation I experience by being his leftover.
Wow. 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 In all that you're saying, I want to be intentional about addressing the men as well. While we're talking about the mistress, the Lord does judge based on how we treat people. And to
Mhm.
see a woman, and I hate the term, as a side piece, it is an accurate term because he only wants a piece of her. He doesn't want the whole woman. And so I would encourage the men that are in those relationships to really understand that you have value, and as a result of the value you have in God, you should value other people the same, and not use a woman as a stress relief, and use
That's right.
sex with another woman to be tantamount to what you would get from a Tylenol or Advil, but to see
Yeah.
her as a woman made in God's image
Yeah.
should be honored and such, and to see that fidelity is actually empowering, and that's
That's
something
right.
that real men pursue, to be committed to the wife and family that God allow you to create. So I just want to encourage the brothers in that way.
Yeah.
One of the things too, also we're seeing in our culture lately is tons of people are coming forward with sexual assault stories from the
Hmm.
past, from pastors to actors to movie directors
Hmm.
to music moguls have been accused of this. And not too long ago, I was we were walking through First Thessalonians at my church,
Hmm.
and we got to the point in chapter 4 on in chapter 5 where Paul talks about sexual purity. And one of the things I wanted to address is, we always talk about fornication and adultery, but I don't hear us talking as much about sexual assault, which would still fall
Hmm.
under the realm of sexual immorality. That
Absolutely.
we need to honor people. We need to honor people's bodies. Can you speak
Yeah.
to? Can you speak to? Just the church's relative silence on this issue, and then the second part. Oprah gave this kind of glaring speech at the Golden Globes, standing ovation, and I think I would have to agree with it concerning that. A lot of what
Hmm.
what she said. Can you kind of speak to those two things?
Hmm. Yeah, I think these topics, which is why you wisely have them going together, are interrelated, and they're not very different. At the core of it, it has to do with how, from the beginning of time, um, since the fall, I should say, we just have the view we have of women. How men have historically seen women, and how women have been conditioned to even see themselves. And so the reality is, while men, and I want to say this, are also victims of sexual abuse, the majority of people who are the victims and suffer from sexual abuse are women. And women, the reason why we don't talk about it often is because, in general, women are not as valued. women's bodies are not as valued. And so it all falls under the umbrella of the objectification of women. And so, I mean, even if you just think historically, there was a time when you think about even slaves, slave masters couldn't even be brought on charges for raping their slaves because they were their property. So it was this idea that your body didn't belong to you, but women's bodies haven't belonged to them for a very long time. Um, I want to say here's the thing: whether we're talking about the mistress or the woman who has been sexually assaulted, part of the silence of the church is because from the leadership to the back pew, we have to deal with men's warped idea of women that is being fed through their own sin. You are not going to champion the cause of women. You are not going to stand up and speak out against the assault of women when you yourself are still struggling with pornography, when you go to strip clubs, you know what I mean? When you're looking on your Instagram accounts and you might not have followed the person because you don't want people to see you follow them, but you know who they are and you go and you look at their crazy looking pictures with no clothes on. As long as men in church are still struggling privately or corporately with the objectification of women, it's just not going to be in them. It's not going to be in men to really protect women. And so we talk about when you have a daughter, oh, you better get your shotgun, but men aren't even protecting their daughters all that well. But the reason why I believe is because we have sin upon sin upon sin that is going on in secret that begins to change a person's heart toward
Yeah.
women, that then leaves them vacant and impotent to really honestly authentically act.
Wow.
And you
Yeah.
cannot have a diet of objectifying women, whether that's the music you listen to, whether that's the jokes you tell with your boys, whatever. If you have that kind of diet and lifestyle, I mean, where is the fertile soil of your heart going to spring from something that can grow to say, I need to have a voice? Because even if it's being addressed in the church, it's like women are given a platform to kind of speak up. But the only way that we begin to dismantle and undo the power structures that allow for the abuse of women is if the men with the power and the privilege also become the voice.
No, that's so good. That's so good. I saw recently on the Breakfast Club where Charlemagne the God, he has a segment called Donkey of the Day. And on
Mm-hmm.
this particular segment, he gave the Donkey of the Day to himself. And he gave it to himself, and he was saying he just didn't realize how much he was informed and shaped by rape culture. And he began to talk about movies like Porky's, Revenge of the Nerds, even House Party, where these movies where in some cases dudes would blindfold a woman and his friend would come in and sleep with her and she wouldn't know, and it was all seen as funny. And he was just saying how he didn't realize from music to so many things that the culture has trained us to objectify women, which is why I love what you're saying, because a biblical worldview is so much is obviously better, but it's essential. Like when Paul
Mm-hmm.
talks about that in 1 Corinthians 7, he's talking about the realm of marriage, but he talks about he says something that was profound in the first century. He says, all right, and likewise referring to intimacy. He says
Mm-hmm.
the man doesn't have authority over the body, but his wife does. And in
Mm-hmm.
that instance, he's not affirming assault value, because in first century, they were
Mm-hmm.
dealing with the same things that we're dealing with, where there was this double standard as it related to purity. Women were
Yeah.
expected to be pure, but if a man had a woman on the side, that was accepted. But then he also, in that same verse, he was rebuking male misogyny. And
Yeah.
he was saying that we need to see these women as people made in the image of God. And so, in us addressing this, it is also rebuke to men when we
Mm-hmm.
don't speak up,
Mm-hmm.
when we see it as an isolated issue, or if we see it as an issue separate from the gospel. And so
Mm-hmm.
I'm grateful for just the connection you made, because
Yeah.
I just think it's essential that we not be silent on this.
Absolutely. And I think the evidence of it it's a collaborative thing that has many different tentacles, because it's not just about speaking up and out against rape culture,
Right.
but being careful about even the words we use,
Hmm.
even some of the slang and jargon. I mean, and sometimes it comes from the pulpit because it's a part of our culture. But when we refer to sex, even in the house of God, like bang, smash, hit, I mean, like those, that's how the street, that's the colloquialism that the street uses, and even women have adopted it and used that language. But I mean, when you're talking about sex and making love, which is a God thing and a God creation, but then we use language like smash and hit and bang. I mean, you can't, that is not separate from just how we're conditioned even to think
Wow.
about how men engage with women. And I also think part of how we end or begin to speak out against rape culture is to speak out and up and make room for women in the church. And I don't
Yeah.
mean make room in an unbiblical way, but part of how a church affirms and proves its love and value for and dignity of women is to give women legitimate biblical room to exercise their gifts and their callings, discipleship and training and appropriate leadership experiences, and not just because one of the things the church often has too is we have the tokenism issue. We'll have the
Mm.
token woman. So sometimes it's the women's ministry leader, and then she's the only person maybe that does anything in the church. Or we have one other woman that's the praise and worship leader. So the church is like, well, we got a woman there, so we're done with making room for women, when really they should be models, and they should be people who then are opening up the door for other women to grow, to learn, and to exercise their calling and walk in the church in a way that honors and glorifies God. And but part of that is reshaping and reshifting our view of women. And I think oftentimes the church is afraid of that. And again, I'm not going beyond biblical appropriate roles for women, right? But what I am talking about is not being afraid that if women have a role in the church, that is automatically going to feminize the church. If a woman is
Mm.
a helper, and if even Jesus himself walked with women and was helped by women in his ministry, I mean, we can't allow our men can't allow their fears, um, often whose roots are not in complementarianism but are rooted in misogyny, use scripture to continue to let misogyny live and breathe even within the church. And so it's really about a whole reshaping of our view of women, and to realize how Satan has used that false and perverted view of women in the church to keep men and women separate, to degrade and not lift the dignity of women, and to not let the church function as well as God called it to.
Now that's perfect. That was going to be my final question was, how can we intentionally empower women? And I think it's perfect how you responded, that we don't relegate them to just
Mhm.
women's ministry or children's church, but that we
Right.
we realize that no, God has given many gifts, and He has not only given the teaching gifts to men, but that
That's
that
right.
God has distributed, the
Hmm.
gift of teaching. And while we obviously there's disagreement on titles when we talk about elder and things like that, which I
Hmm.
totally
Yeah.
understand as someone who affirms complementarianism, I do think, as you're saying, it's important that we intentionally empower. Now, you mentioned something I want you to speak into a little more, and you talked about male fear. Can you
Hmm.
speak a little bit more into that?
Yeah, what I mean by that is I just think that we have different segments of church experience. When I think about what it takes to bring liberation to women, even within the church, you see two opposite ends of the spectrum that I think are unhealthy. On one end of the spectrum, you have kind of like the foot of the church, men's foot is on women's necks, and women can't do anything, and women are stereotyped as Jezebels and harlots and the adulterous woman, and they're talked about in ways that are to be feared and to be disgraced, and they're not used, and they're relegated and unaffirmed in ways that aren't biblical. So that is one end of the spectrum that we need to deal with. But then oftentimes the pendulum swings all the way over to the other end of the spectrum, which is also unhealthy and unbiblical, and we engage in permissibility, and so over here we've got oppression of women, and over here we've got too much permissibility of women, where women are doing things in leadership and that are really, in my opinion, as someone who affirms complementarianism, go against how scripture calls women to function differently in the family and in the church. And so to just release women to do anything isn't the solution for the oppression of women. And so because we often see churches dealing with the extremes of how women are treated in the fear of not going to permissibility, churches who are really trying to do it biblically are often shying away from giving women an appropriate platform in the church. But then the other part of it is, we've had so many churches where the men are underrepresented, where the men have not had leadership positions, where the men are invisible. Most of our churches are filled with women, and very few men come in, and oftentimes it doesn't draw men. I mean, the Nation of Islam is as powerful as it is because it is affirming like Black male identity, and so men gravitate to things that feel manly. And so the fear often is, if we give women opportunities that the Bible and that God would approve of, does that then detract from the other mission that we need to deal with, which is to draw godly men and build up godly men? And so we just can be easily off balance if we're trying to correct the problem of lack of men with the invisibility of women.
Wow. Dr. Lyons, thank you so much. You've given us a lot to think about. I pray that my viewers will check this out, really, really listen and be empowered by this. Now, you have your own show yourself where
Yes.
you tackle different topics. Can you tell us a little bit about your show? And I want to encourage people to
Sure.
subscribe to it.
Sure. So my show is under my name, Dr. Sarita Lyons, on YouTube, and I also broadcast it on Facebook. But it's called Face to Face with Dr. Sarita Lyons. And I was even thinking about the idea in Corinthians when it says, and we see through a glass dimly,
Yeah.
but then we'll see him face to face.
Thanks.
And this idea is that as we're tackling social issues, relational issues, we are seeing through a glass dimly, right? But one
Right.
day it's going to all be clear. And so what I seek to do on the show is, even with our limited vision, have a worldview that's based in scripture and what God would ordain for us, to try to have a better sense of what God wills for our lives. We deal with everything that pertains to it. It is definitely a show created for women, to encourage women. I am a big proponent of women studying the word and becoming solid disciples of Jesus Christ and theologians. I think
Right.
too often women either feel or have been nurtured just through kind of um, devotionals, but haven't been given permission and freedom and the tools to
Yeah.
really become like biblical scholars and learn how to study and how to rightly divide the word. And so I'm very passionate about building women up in that way. I'm also dealing with cultural issues with regard to racism and obviously sexism and
Yeah.
the infiltration of feminism in the church, and just even how to be a godly woman, how to live and breathe in that skin. So we do a lot of fun stuff. And then obviously, as a clinician, I am always probably coming from a counseling bent,
Yeah.
care about, who we are, mind, body, and soul, and wanting people to get healthy. Because for all this Bible and access to scripture and truth and teaching we have, the church is often very emotionally sick. And we have all this deep spirituality, and we lack a lot of the emotional wholeness that really is evidence also of spirituality, that I want the church, and specifically even the Black church, to embrace and desire wholeness on all levels. So I'm definitely using that platform by God's grace to bring him glory and to keep the conversation going about healing and wholeness.
That is awesome. I want to encourage all of my viewers to subscribe to Dr. Sarita Lyons' YouTube channel. It is after her name, so make sure you subscribe and check out. She has wonderful wisdom. She's a scholar. I'm gonna put her in that category with how God has gifted her, and I'm sure that you'll be blessed if you tune in. Well, again, Dr. Lyons, thank you so much for being on the Urban Perspective. You've been tuned into the UP. I love you. God bless you. Peace.